Welcome to the Tech Life podcast. In this episode, I caught up with Ben Whitmore, ex-public sector worker turned consultant and newly minted Microsoft MVP within enterprise mobility. This time we talk mainly tech, but as we discuss, when it's your passion, it can make you happy outside of work, as long as you still know when to take some downtime. I hope you enjoy, and don't forget to subscribe, turn on your notifications for upcoming episodes, and drop a like or comment. Ben, great to finally get some time with you here at MMS. Obviously, I've spoken to you a bit before. Do you want to just introduce and explain where you are, where you come from, what is it you're doing now?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me. That's so sweet. This is my first MMS actually.
Really?
So it's really cool to be here. I've seen it for years, running. The last few years it's been on. We've had a short break, and I'm always thinking, it'd be so cool to go there. There's so much to learn, and being here is like, wow, you need like a super brain to soak up all the information. I'm an MVP in enterprise mobility for the last year. So I work heavily with Intune and Config Manager, Azure AD, and probably been focused on that space for the last 5 to 6 years. The last 12 months I've moved into a consultancy role with a company called Cloudway. So before that I was in local government for 14 years.
An area I know well.
Yeah, so those guys don't move fast at all, but quite luckily we got to the point where we were a config manager and we were looking at Intune. So I saw some of the challenges from behind the consultancy fence, so to speak, some of the political challenges. Mm-hmm. But consultancy is kind of projecting into this world where there's so many different customers with different requirements. It's fast-paced, but it's exciting at the same time.
Yeah.
So when you look at a technology like Config Man or Intune or Azure AD or migrations, you never see the same thing twice. And right. I think that's what's so cool about working in this space.
It's an interesting one because obviously from a consultant background as well as being in that customer background, do you also see as well a lot of the similarities between customers where they might not have the exact same problem, but there is a lot of similarities between customers where you might have originally thought, it's just me, it's just my organisation. But then with us being consultants, we see it again and again.
Yeah, sure. It's the same gaps that we see come up. Like if we say to a customer, so you've got domain joined devices at the moment, so we really want to take full value of the cloud. So let's look at getting your Azure AD joined. And then there's always the conversation like, well, how do I then authenticate against my file servers? Or how does that work? We then have to explain that you can, from an Azure AD joined device, still authenticate with Kerberos, and we explain that process. So that's a common concern, and we have to work through that. User profiles is a big one. So to some companies, you say, okay, we're going to move you to Azure AD, so it's basically like joining another domain. So the user's going to get a new profile when they log in, and that's a big concern because, we don't know what's in the user's profile. What applications have they got? What data do they have? What's in the current user queue? And so each customer is different, but those commonalities come through most times as well.
Yeah, so it's not as if that pain hasn't been experienced elsewhere. There's usually solutions.
Exactly.
Just finding it into that next customer.
And the cool thing is, like, if there isn't a Microsoft solution today, we build our own solutions, and then we can say, okay, we've done this before with the customer, so we don't need to reinvent the wheel, or it's not going to take us like 50 days to build you a solution. We've done it before. Let's not reinvent the wheel. Here we go. Plug the gap until Microsoft build that solution into their product.
That's a good point, because especially with being here at MMS, which is such a heavily community-driven event, we get to see lots of that from ideas that people have had, how they've implemented it, and they can actually bring it through and actually help others to understand how to leverage the community. Just because it's just somebody else's thoughts doesn't always mean that it's not going to be something you can leverage within your organisation.
Exactly, and so I've been in quite a few sessions where you go in and it's like, wow, you're doing this, and like, I've seen you on Twitter, but I didn't know you're doing this. And it's like, snap, take pictures. So the cool thing, like you say, about the community here is like, you get to see people for the first time. They look slightly different. The Twitter pictures look slightly different to the first. It's like
not all of us look like Pierce Brosnan.
No, none of us look like Pierce Brosnan. It's like you find out what other people are doing. You're in the session, you take the picture, and like people are uploading scripts and solutions, and honestly, you're going back with like a goodie bag from a kid's party, all these different things you can try. And the great thing is, the solutions we're seeing at MMS, they may not fit exactly, but they spark that creativity. You've got a script there, you can go home with and say, well, I can tweak this.
I've spoken to so many people this week where it's that idea generation, and they're taking things and running with it to actually make their lives better than the organization.
And the great thing is we've taken the time out of our busy life to come to this event so we can focus on that. I mean, I don't know about you, but when I'm working through the day, I'll see stuff come up on Twitter. I'm like, oh, that looks really cool. I'm going to send that to OneNote or To Do or something, and I'll look at it later.
Yeah.
And that list builds and builds and builds and builds, and you never look at it. And you might be missing a really cool solution. Whereas when you come out of that kind of work goldfish bowl, actually come to an event, you're focused on the event and those solutions. And I think that's why it's so important to have these in-person events again.
Makes perfect sense. And it is good to be back in person. I know Zoom and Teams has made a great difference to being completely isolated over these last couple of years, but there is nothing that actually beats that proper in-person networking.
This is like, I feed off of this because, so I'm a consultant, but I work at home full time. So I don't even see my colleagues. So you can get real cabin fever setting, you wake up in the morning, you get the kids ready for school, you take the kids to school, you're in the same chair all day, then the kids come home, you get the kids some food, get them in bed, and then, when you're passionate about something, you're back in that chair again, doing some more stuff, doing some more blogging. And when you look back on the week, you're thinking, I've been in that chair for like 80% of the week and I've not really spoken to a real human, So this is like, gives you another level of energy coming to something like this.
That's an interesting thing, especially with lots of people now doing the whole home working, probably more than they did before. Obviously, I spent a lot of time home working prior to this, so it wasn't too much of a change. But how do you break yourself out of that, almost that thought process definition of that is work time and that is personal time?
Yeah, you have to be really strict on it. So I'm not an expert at keeping to those, 9 till 5. So the way my brain works is if I don't understand something, I'm going to look at it and tinker with it until I understand it. And often that will mean, like I've just said, you've got the family time in the morning, you're working during the day, then there's some family time in the evening, and then you're straight back on the computer again. And I am conscious of being careful with that because you do need downtime because your brain cannot be boom, 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 learn all the time. Because you're just going to get exhausted. And I've reached that point on some occasions, and so I've had to reel myself back in and say, look, I need some downtime. I need just to clear my brain. It's really important.
Do you have other hobbies outside of just the general tech and the curiosity world? Are you active in sports or anything?
10 years ago.
10 years ago. Don't get me wrong, I cannot say anything on this score. I used to be the least active person that I've probably met.
Yeah, I love going to the gym, and so once you've been, you get that kind of release of endorphins. I think that's the chemical that's released, isn't it? In workout. That does feel good, but it's a discipline, So I would say my hobby and my passion is the stuff I work with. So I don't really have that other place to go to. I'm kind of wrapped up in the IT world, but it's something I love.
Absolutely. And when you've got a passion for something, there's a lot to be said for it. It doesn't mean it has to be just something you do just for one thing. You can do it constantly. If that passion is there and driving it, makes you happy.
Yeah, if you enjoy it, why not? Hey, because I can feel it now. So I'm getting older, so the brain still learns, but it doesn't learn as quick the older you get. Is what I'm finding. So
I'm going for that. I'm an old man, so.
This is personal, So, and it might not be that. It might be because when you're in this game, there's so much stuff to learn, isn't there? Yeah. So even if you say I'm working with Intune, well, you're not. You're working with Azure AD. You're working with legacy like domain controllers, file servers. Customers don't very rarely have this like greenfield requirement where you go in and say, "Hey, I've got nothing. Set me up with Intune." There's always a lot of other moving parts.
It's an interesting one that
it often gets forgotten about or just not totally understood. That back in the day, this is where I'll probably start to sound old, when you were just dealing with just one product like Exchange, you went and you mastered Exchange. That's all you needed to know. So like all the mail transports and stuff going on there. When you moved more into the desktop side of it, it was like, actually, I need to understand the networking side, I need to understand the connections to other applications. When you go into the systems management side, especially now with Intune, as you mentioned, it's not just Intune on its own. It's all the other libraries, the Azure ID, the identity, all the conditional access pieces that go with that.
So yeah, absolutely. So I can take a really simple example of lots of moving parts for a simple solution. So a customer says, I want to deliver certificates via Intune. Okay, cool. So maybe we can use PKCS, or maybe they have a requirement for SCEP. So let's say they want to give a certificate to a useless device, perhaps. Yeah. So we're now talking SCEP. So now I need to spin up NDES servers. I need to have knowledge about networking, Active Directory certificate services, certificate revocation. So it's like DNS, networking, Active Directory, firewalls, security. But it's just delivering a certificate, isn't it?
Yeah.
But there's so many more things that fall into that category. That.
Interesting. Did you see there was a little snippet of announcement when Microsoft were doing around the whole premium add-ons that are coming down the pipeline with the whole remote assist. There was a little bit of a mention around basically cloud-delivered certificate services.
Yes. Yeah, that's going to be interesting.
That's going to be a very interesting.
Yeah, I don't know what that's going to look like yet.
No, none of us really know yet. But
anything to take away, and Microsoft are doing awesome with this. So you only have to look at, and I've got a session here this week actually talking about Key Trust, so Hello for Business. Okay. So some customers use Hello for Business with Key Trust. Not many people use Certificate Trust these days that I've worked with. But now we can do cloud Key Trust.
Yes.
So you don't need the complexity of certificates and certificate revocation points on-prem and domain controller certificates, where there's a lot of things to step up. Literally, it's a PowerShell command. You get a read-only domain controller, and you can issue TGTs without all the complexity behind what you would normally need for Hello Key Trust.
Lots.
Yeah, so that's amazing.
There is an ongoing trend at the minute we're seeing from Microsoft where they're just trying to knock down the barriers of adoption to a lot of these products, just to make it as simple as possible to implement, while still giving you a lot of the security benefits of being in the cloud.
Absolutely. And so sometimes where we see there's not a solution from Microsoft, coming to MMS and talking to the product managers, they're aware of it and they're building products. But there's a chronological order of events that has to happen. There's other stuff with different priority. But where we think, I'd really like to do this, those guys and girls are like 10 miles ahead of us already, thinking about it, and it's going to come.
Interesting enough, I was talking to, he used to be an ex-MVP, he used to be Cameron earlier. He's now with Microsoft. And you might have started to see, because you're fairly fresh to the MVP, that interaction with the product team, what they start to show you behind the scenes that you can't necessarily talk about. But then, as Steve was saying, going across to Microsoft, you get to see even more behind the scenes in terms of information. It just shows how much the product teams are thinking ahead. And they're not just being obtuse, for want of a better word, or holding back information. You find that they give. Well, what's your opinion of how much that they feed out the information, both internally with the MVP side, and then what then becomes more public information?
There are stages where information is fed through. So we, as MVPs, we do get some kind of insider knowledge on that, which is great. So we often can't share that with customers, but we can kind of shape conversations around, look, don't not start your journey to the cloud because you think there's something missing, because you look 10 minutes into the future and there's going to be a solution there, So it is important that we have that.
And there's also a feedback mechanism that the product teams really do take on board, I tend to find.
I mean, one of the great things Microsoft have, so I can talk for the enterprise mobility MVPs, is we have this kind of community within a community. So we can feedback to the product team, and we do have interaction with them as well. So if we're getting the same thing from different customers, this isn't working or this isn't quite right, we've noticed something in Intune and it's not quite right, we've got that feedback, so we can feedback. And especially, it doesn't even have to be an MVP who does that. So if you take Config Manager, for example, if you every single smiley face or frown you put in the config manager console, that's going directly to the team who write the code. Yeah. So do it yourself.
That's right. A lot of people just think it's a fancy feature there. It's part of the UI. It's just like, oh yeah, they have to have a.
Yeah.
That does actually get listened to.
Absolutely.
By the devs
Yeah. And maybe for other products, I can't speak for them. Maybe it is. If I click that, it's just going to go into the marketing mailbox. It's not, read, but we've heard in MMS that specifically goes to the developers, and
So you mentioned earlier, obviously, especially with so many intermoving parts and the rapid pace that the cloud changes, the learning aspect is quite high in terms of volume. How do you specifically keep on top of bits and pieces? What's your preferred mechanism for learning?
I guess a common way for me to learn a new technology would be spin a GitLab. Absolutely, yeah. So you can spin up a Hyper-V lab quite cheaply yourself. You can get free Intune licensing. Yeah, but I always start with the Microsoft Docs because they're very good these days. And since moving those to GitHub, where people could do pull requests on inaccuracies or missing stuff that is actually quite important, those docs are kept up to date. Yeah, I don't see that across many vendors. Microsoft are doing really well with their docs, and so I start with the docs, get up in a lab, and just start thrashing through it.
I must admit, I'm guilty of this. The number of times I used to see an article and just go, "Oh, that's not quite right," or "They should include this example," and just moan about it.
Yeah, do a pull request.
That's the thing. You can now directly influence that document.
Yeah, and they go straight through to the product team. They say, "Yeah, that's relevant. That's cool. We'll accept that," and it goes straight through to the docs. So then you get your badge on the docs page. It's like famous for 5 minutes.
So there's no excuse for just moaning about it. You can actually do something.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So that's normally how I approach it. Read the docs, try it myself. Yeah, there's going to be customers going to implement it slightly differently, but it gets your mind thinking about how this new technology is working. Break it in your lab before you break it with the customer. It's always good.
Yeah, because my team tends to hate me because we have the lab and the one rule in it is you break it, you fix it. And that's designed to actually encourage them to actually go and actually tear it apart as much as possible. Because I think that the people probably learn more with having to fix a problem than just simply a couple of clicks of a button and it works.
Oh yeah,
standing behind it.
We ran a session yesterday talking about how to build your own home lab. So I always say, build it manually once. Yeah, build a domain controller, build a config manager. Do it manually so you know how you're doing it and what's involved. But then after you've done it 1 or 2 times, get a hydration kit. Yeah. So even the Microsoft hydration kit for config manager, you download it. It's like 22 gigs, but you can have a full config manager instance with Active Directory, some test devices, all joined to Active Directory and ready to do config manager. Like 15 minutes.
I do like that recommendation that at least go through it once for the understanding, because it's far too easy just to assume that something's there, and then when you encounter a problem with it later, have no understanding of them connectivity paths.
Yeah, play with different scenarios. So some customers have ADFS still, so when you're looking at how to do authentication with like Hello, for example, then if you've just been learning key trust, that will completely change, so you maybe have to spin up some ADFS or a separate domain controller to get into that.
Yeah, try it. So, one tech that you're either excited about or couldn't live without that's either coming or is currently here, what would it be?
Great question. I'm really excited to see what they're doing with Windows 365.
Okay.
The ability to spin up an instance really quickly and to have that one-to-one user relationship with that cloud instance is going to be really cool, I think. Really cool.
Yeah, there's some interesting scenarios that can be delivered through that side of things.
Yeah, so as a consultant, some of the challenges we have is trying to manage all the different hardware models out there, so how do we make sure BIOSes are kept to date, drivers are kept up to date, Whereas when we're talking about protecting machines, we don't really care about the machines, we care about the data. Yeah. So the user's identity is critical. Let's protect that, because the days of protecting the office with a firewall, they're kind of going. It's still important, but the identity is the important thing to protect, and the data is the important thing to protect. So if now I can protect everything within my Windows 365 instance, That's cool. Do I then really care about the device the user's using? Well, maybe not. That concern may get less and less.
Yeah, certainly opens up around like bringing your own device scenarios, home working.
Yeah, and there's I think there's some really cool developments in the pipeline as well when we look at app protection. So what people can do with their personal devices as well. So there's some really cool stuff.
Things around the edge policies and stuff.
There's some really cool stuff coming out. Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, it's been a pleasure to catch up with you.
Thanks for inviting me across.
Spending time. Enjoy the rest of MMS. You've got a couple more sessions coming up, I believe.
2 more tomorrow.
Yeah.
And then we're on the Shandies.
That's brilliant. Oh well, good luck with them, and we'll catch up again later.
Cheers, Steve.
Brilliant. Cheers.
In the next episode, I'll be talking to Mike Donoski, Senior Product Manager at Microsoft, working on Intune with a focus on policy. We'll be talking time management and focus, mailbox rules, Cinco de Mayo, Doctor Strange, and of course, Intune. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, hit like, and drop a comment if you want to see more of this type of content.